Okay, Oliver, we're going to start the second episode here. We have to send a rescue out there to get Jeb, who we stranded on the moon in the last episode. So I'm going to start with a two-place capsule. And like always, we have to go through the horrible rigmarole of turning on rigid attachment and auto strut on every part we install. We're going to want to put a docking attachment, docking port on top, and we definitely want a heat shield and a decoupler. Okay, so this is our return vehicle. We're going to have to have a lunar lander to pick up Jeb as well. So let's see what engine we should put here. Let's use this one. And so I'm not sure you have all these options for the extra mods that I have. I installed extra mods on the computer, so it becomes a little bit confusing if you're looking for something that I have on my computer and it's not there. It's because I have a mod installed. But don't worry too much about that. So this is our capsule. We need to put some solar panels on there. All right. We're going to go ahead and create our action group on key 1. So that's a return vehicle. We need some parachutes. Don't forget the parachutes. We can't have the commander of the Southern Legions falling to Earth without a parachute. And we're going to want one drogue chute just so it opens up and slows us down a little bit early. We don't actually need it, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't help. Or sorry, it can't hurt. Okay, so before I build the bottom of this, I'm going to build our little lunar lander. And to do that, I'm going to use a small remote guidance unit because it's going to be an unmanned lander. So the first thing we have to do is grab another docking port and we hit the S key or W key and flip it upside down, place it on there. So it comes pre-docked. Now I'm going to add the guidance unit because it can be controlled by the computer or remotely. And then I'm going to add the lander. Let's use the Apollo style lander. Actually, we don't even need to go that big. That's a 2-person lander. So I'm going to use the regular capsule. Got to flip everything upside down with the keys. So I'm going to go ahead and rigid attachments on. Got to turn that one on. Turn that one on. Now we could do it the Apollo style where it's actually underneath the main capsule and we have to undock from our ascent vehicle, turn around and grab it on our way to the moon, but that can get a little bit complicated in the build. So we'll worry about doing the fancy stuff later, and right now we'll just focus on rescuing Jeb off the Mun. So right now, this capsule right here is going down to the moon, but we don't need parachutes because the moon doesn't have atmosphere, and we're not going to return to Earth in this vehicle, so we don't need parachutes. So what I am going to do, however, is add a radio antenna so that we can communicate. Actually, I'm going to add a smaller one. We don't need all that fancy. We don't need a bigger antenna. Okay, so now let's get ourselves a tank. And we're going to use a very small engine, the Pug. I don't think you have this on your KSP, but this is a very low output engine, but we don't need a lot because we're on the moon. So let's see, the rigid attachment on, rigid attachment on. Now we're going to make this a little 2-stage lander because I don't know exactly how much we need. But I'm going to overbuild just a little bit with a margin of error we're going to have to put a bigger engine on this because it is heavier. This engine has to do more work. So then we're going to need some landing gear. Get some medium-sized landing gear, turn it upside down. We got to turn everything upside down. We hit the X key to multiply our gear. And then we don't necessarily have to rigid attach the landing gear. It's not really part of the flight, but we're going to start retracted. Okay, so now we need power. So we're going to add just 2 solar panels. And we're going to add them to our existing key so that they all open on one key. We could attach it to control group 2, but I'm just going to do it all in control group 1. So we have power, got the capsule, we got the guidance unit, got our first stage and our second stage, got landing gear. Okay, I think we have everything we need. Now since that's a small connection right there, I am going to use some, oops, not quite make it symmetrical, there we go. This is going to reinforce our system here so it doesn't get too wobbly on our ascent up to orbit. Okay, so that's everything we need there. Ooh, nope, I almost forgot. I knew I was forgetting something. We need some thrusters, some RCS thrusters. Reaction control. We're going to need 4 of them. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove these solar panels and I'm going to put smaller solar panels on. Just 2 of them. Those solar panels were too big for what we needed anyway. And then I'm going to take this off and I'm going to add some, oh, these are too big. I'm going to add 4 of these. So I'm going to place them like this, and I'm going to hit the 2 key on the keyboard and then left click, and then I can actually embed them inside of the existing fuel tank. And then I hit the 1 key to go back, and we'll reattach this. So now we've got those little tanks were for the fuel for this, so we can maneuver to redock. So now we have everything we need. Okay, so we're going to call this Jeb Rescue. Save it. So now we need to continue on with our build, so I'm going to grab a bigger decoupler here. Whoa. I'm going to turn on the rigid attachment, then I'm going to put on a fairing. Put on a bigger fairing. There we go. Rigid attachment. Back off a little bit so we can see everything. Oops. I'm going to build the fairing. Now we can adjust how many sides the fairing will split into when we eject it. We can increase the ejection force. There we go. Clamshell deploy, so that's going to do it in 2 instead of breaking it into a million pieces. And then we can change the color if we want. Got a few different options. I'm going to go with the cool silver one. Now, we need to get this entire assembly to lunar orbit. So we're going to need a little bit more than we needed in the last video. So I'm going to add, this is our orbital stage. It's going to be our second stage to orbit, but it's going to be part of the fuel that we need to go to the moon. So right here, oh, I almost forgot, I'm going to add some advanced reaction wheels, which is going to give us a lot of control authority to reposition our attitude in space. Need just one of those. And I'm going, this draws a lot of energy, the reaction wheels, so I'm going to add some bigger solar panels. We only need 2 of them. add these solar panels again to the same existing ones, or did I not? Oh yeah, I took the other ones off. Okay, so now this motor fires and this ejects. What's going on here? Okay, so this. So we got to adjust our staging ahead of time. So this motor fires, then we eject the fairing, and then we eject that, and then that motor fires. So that's that motor. Last. Okay, that's about good. We can worry about this top stuff after we rescue Jeb. So moving down, oops, we need another decoupler. Like always, see that the taller the rocket gets, the more you need the rigid attachment. Otherwise, it gets really bendy and wobbly, and then it becomes hard to get to orbit. So now we're going to build our first stage. And it's not going to be quite as big as our Saturn V rocket because we're not launching a 3-man capsule into space, we're launching a 2-man capsule into space. I'm going to want to move this separator down. Let's see what we got here. So I'm going to, these are the old, I believe these are the first stage engines they used on the Saturn V, or at least that's what the game has them. So I'm going to add 4 of them. So you won't have this mod. So it won't tell you this. So I'm going to get 1.75 out of that. And it's 3,200. Okay, so our rocket is a little bit overbuilt, but it's okay. I'm going to turn the gimbal slider down to about somewhere between 5 and 15 is good. I always go around 7. I'm going to double check to make sure. Oh, yep, we didn't do the rigid attachment. Okay, so we have 3,200 meters a second to get to orbit. That's our first stage. We can check that by clicking the delta V. This is the delta symbol. Delta is a fancy code name for change. All it means is change, and V stands for velocity. So when you say delta V, you're saying a change in velocity. So this is how much change in velocity we have. It's basically the equivalent to putting fuel in your car. So you put gas in your car, and when you fill up your tank, you have the maximum amount of miles your car can go, which is what we have here. So if we change to vacuum, it gives us a little bit more on this first stage, but since we're not taking off in a vacuum, we're taking off on Earth or Kerbin, that's not going to matter. But that does tell us how much we have in our second stage and our third stage, which is important once we get to space. So we have enough to get to the moon and get back. That's basically what I'm checking right now. So we can turn that off. We know our rocket's good. Somehow I know I'm forgetting something. I always do. But I think this is a pretty good start. Hopefully we don't get up to the Mun. Actually, I'm going to attach 6 of them instead of 4. Actually 8. There. That's more better. Actually, I'll attach them up higher so it's not as wobbly. All right. So now we don't want to fill our craft up with engineers because then, or with pilots, with astronauts, because then we won't have enough to bring him home. So we're just going to have Valentina go out and get Jeb. We're going to save it, and then we're going to launch. So using the same principles as we did in the first episode, we're going to, this is a bigger rocket, but everything is relatively the same. Things just happen a little bit slower because the rocket is bigger, so it takes more energy to move that bigger rocket. So I hit Z, so my throttle's all the way up, and we are ready for launch. And we're accelerating at the perfect rate, so I'm going to wait till we get to about 60 or 70. And now I have to push and hold the key a little bit longer. And I want to keep it out ahead of our prograde marker a little bit to bring our prograde marker out to that first 10 degrees. And then I hit it. And now, okay, now I'm going to lower our throttle because we're going a little bit too fast. We're getting ahead of ourselves. We want to be at 200 meters a second when we get to the second 10 degrees. Since we're a little bit ahead, I'm going to slow us down with our throttle. I'm not using any steering keys. Slow us down a little bit more. We're catching up to our 30% a little bit fast. When that gets to 300, we're there. We're right on track, so I'm going to add back a little bit of power to about halfway between the first and second G-force, so 1G, 2G. And we want to stay relatively close to this line. You can adjust that by hitting your S key and just adjusting a little bit. Sometimes when you make bigger rockets, you start getting off your 90-degree line. So to get to the moon, we want to stay as close to this 90-degree line as possible so that we're in a perfect equatorial orbit. I'm going to add some more power now. And then I'm going to take it off. I guess I was jumping the gun. We want to stay in a perfect equatorial orbit because that is the same orbit the moon's on. That way we have more options to get to the moon that way. We don't have windows as much. We have just the timing of it, not the inclination. Inclination tends to use up a lot of fuel if you don't do that right in the beginning. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, okay, we're coming to orbit a little bit high. So I'm going to ease off on the throttle a little bit. We're spending a little bit more energy in the vertical than I want to. But that's okay. I built in extra fuel to make sure we can get to where we're going and finish the mission. We're watching the apoapsis on the left, continually watching that. We're watching how fast we're accelerating and where our throttle is, and we're watching our fuel. So 80 kilometers is good, 81. Anywhere, so above 70 kilometers is what you want. You can be at 300 kilometers, you can be at 80 kilometers, you can be at 150 kilometers, but I will tell you a secret. The closer to Earth you are without entering the atmosphere, the faster your orbital velocity has to be to stay in orbit. And there's a big benefit to that. It means that your orbital velocity is faster. And what that means is you're carrying more kinetic energy. So it may seem counterintuitive, but if you want to go to Mars, it's better to be in a very low Earth orbit when you make your Mars transfer burn than to be up at 500 kilometers. Because when you're at 500 kilometers, your orbital speed will be significantly less. So you're going to have to reaccelerate up to that speed plus more. So it's actually counterintuitive, but being in a lower orbit helps you get further in space when it's time to go. So now we're above the atmosphere. I'm going to deploy. Oops, I shouldn't do that. Because that's going to... I messed up. The solar rays underneath the fairing might have gotten damaged. So now I'm going to hit, so this wasn't set up perfect, so I'm going to deploy the fairings, and then I'm going to hit the solar panels. And once we get up to 80 kilometers, we're going to conduct our prograde burn. We're already set up for it. We're already on the prograde tab. I'm going to go to the map screen. See, it takes longer for a big heavy spaceship to reorient itself in space. So as you build bigger and bigger, it becomes more and more cumbersome. So I'm going to turn on the thrusters, and I'm going to try and reorient ourselves up just a little bit because we're a little bit too far down the lee side of the hill. And I'm going to kill the motor. We have fuel left over, but I'm going to jettison the first stage. And then I'm going to activate the second stage and thrust until we get up above the atmosphere with our periapsis. So you can see our periapsis growing here. I want to get close to 80, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I always kind of wait till they start to rotate like this. Oh, we're pretty close. 80. 80 kilometers and 81 kilometers. Pretty circularized. Okay, so that doesn't matter much. I'm rambling at this point. So now we're going to set the moon as our target. We're going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to kind of, one way to do it is to put it straight up so we know that straight to the left, since the moon is orbiting in this direction. We go straight this way, that's 90 degrees, so we want to set up our maneuver node right there, opposite of where we want to go. And then we're going to burn prograde, just like before. And you don't have to do this now, but the further away you make a course correction, the less fuel you have to spend. So I'm left click and focus view. Let me see, okay. We're way out, 748 kilometers from the surface of the moon. So we want to get a little bit closer. So I left click on that, and we're going to drag this towards us to continue burning in this direction. We're not burning right now. This is just we're planning our burn. 72 kilometers, a little bit closer. Pull it towards us. 19 kilometers. I usually shoot for about 30, but whatever. So now we're going to hit our maneuver node button. And what that's going to do is orient us to the direction we have to be facing when we get to this maneuver node. Excuse me. So yeah, I way overbuilt this rocket. We have got plenty of fuel, plenty of power. Okay. Valentina is in this capsule. So now we're oriented for our burn, but we're not near our burn node. We have 21 minutes to our burn node. So let's just speed up time. So it's a 41-second burn. Let's just call it 40-second burn. So let's start our burn 20 seconds before we get there. Oops. So now I'm going to hit it as soon as we're aligned. And Z. So now we're burning. You can see we're burning prograde. We're burning in the direction we're traveling, which is what magically raises our apoapsis. Our goal is to raise our apoapsis to intersect with the path of the moon so that we can get a moon encounter. And we've got a pretty good engine on this one. We're accelerating at 2 Gs. Sometimes you put a motor on and it takes forever to accelerate. But the more you play, the more you know what each part is for, so it's easier to do your build. And I burnt a little bit too much, but guess what? I kind of wanted to. This way we can ditch this stage. We're not going to need it, and we don't want to leave it adrift in space. So, here we are. We finished our burn. We're traveling 3,100 meters a second at our periapsis around Earth, which is way too fast, and it's going to eject us way out away from Earth, right up to the moon. So I'm going to fast forward. You can see in the beginning we move faster, but then as we get closer and closer to the moon, we're being pulled back by the Earth, so our velocity is slowing way down. You can see our velocity is going to slow way down, probably to about 250 meters a second or so. Maybe even lower. But it's a pretty good guess. And now we are going to get a moon encounter. Now we're on a direct collision course to the moon. So, since I don't want to leave something in space to hit somebody else's poor spaceship, I'm going to orient myself retrograde, which is against the way we're traveling. And I'm going to eject this second stage. Boom. So now as that travels away from us, you can see that its orbital path is right at the moon. So it's going to collide with the moon and explode and be gone, and that way it won't be up in space to hit other spacecraft later on. So I'm going to go back to the map screen, and now I'm going to activate this engine with the space bar. So now, since we're on a collision course, we want this line to come around the moon, not through the moon. So what we can do is we can point radially out, which is going to be facing this direction. So as we burn this direction, it's going to change our trajectory this direction at the moon. So I'll show you for reference. You can see how we're pointing in reference to the moon. I'm going to turn on the engine slightly. You can watch our stage kind of move away from us as we accelerate. And you can see what it's doing to our trajectory to burn radially out. And you can see that we're using very little fuel right now. We're going to do this. Oh, there we go. We got about 34 kilometers from the moon. That's about where we want. So we're coming close, but we're not going to hit it. So now, you don't have to do this, but you can create a maneuver node, and you burn retrograde. When you get to this point, we're going to be burning, we're going to face this direction and burn our engine facing that direction so that we're slowing down. We want to slow down this direction so that we're slowing down so that we'll start to fall around the moon instead of go off into space. So we're going to hit our maneuver node, which is going to orient us to the position we need to be in when we get there. So our burn time is 30 seconds. So we split our burn in two. We want to get to this maneuver node with 15 seconds left over. We start our burn at 15 seconds. We burn through the maneuver node and add an additional 15 seconds because our burn time is 30. So we're going to burn half of our burn before and half of our burn after. And I know this, I already described this, but repetition helps. So now we're going to speed up. We want to watch our timer here. Okay, when we get to 15 seconds, I'm going to turn on the burner, and we're going to be burning the opposite way we're traveling, which is going to slow us down in relation to the moon. Because we're going too fast to orbit the moon, we're going to fly out to space. Okay, engine is on. We have to slow down that many meters per second, and you can see what happens. Our trajectory out into space is getting smaller and smaller and closer. Now we're circularizing, and our goal is to circularize our orbit. And I've got my finger on the X key to cut off the burn. And you don't have to cut it off. It doesn't have to be perfect. So now we're in a circular, but you can see our inclination is off. So if we try and land where Jeb is, he's on this side of the crater, we're going to land way over here, which means we're going to have to spend a lot of fuel to do that. But there's a trick we can do. We can speed up time. So that Jeb crosses our orbital inclination path. This is what NASA does a lot. I think maybe one more orbit. There we go. It looks like we're lined up with them. So I'm going to turn around retrograde. Oops, actually what I messed up. I'm going to save the game. Okay, I had to put a communication satellite in there because on the backside of the moon the spacecraft wasn't getting a signal and it's being controlled by Earth, so the only thing I could do is use full power or no power, which means that it would have been impossible to land. So here we are lining back up. We're going to separate, and we're going to use the right bracket key to change views. I'm going to turn on the RCS and back up using the N key. going to face retrograde. I'm going to activate the engine. Going to burn retro a little bit to lower our periapsis to get closer to where we're going to land. Using the shift key, I'm going to be very gentle. I don't want to burn too heavy. And we're going to stop right about there. Now we're going to fast forward a little bit. Turn retro again. And I'm hoping that now that we're in the sunlight, we have a little bit more power from the solar panels. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to face normal because we're coming in under. And I'm going to burn in this direction, as you can see, to line us up. Now normally when you land on the moon, you don't have to be so precise where you're landing, but in this case we want to land close to Jeb so he doesn't have to walk 10 miles on the moon. I'm going to hit G for gear. It's going to deploy our landing gear. You don't have to learn all the keyboard shortcuts, but it does help over time. And then one of the things I'm going to do is rotate to this orientation so I know which way to point when we take off back into orbit after we get Jeb. Now, it's hard to be precise here. I'm going to try and get within like half a kilometer from him, 500 meters or so. We're under full power right now. We've got enough delta V on the second stage of this to get back in orbit and rendezvous with the spaceship, so if I use up all this fuel maneuvering and landing, it's not a big deal. And I'm going to cut off my power about here. And I'm going to face upward again so we can get a little bit closer. Then now we're more on target. So this is sea level, so let's switch it to ground level. So if we're going to come in a little bit short, so I'm going to go radial out and burn, and then back to retrograde. I'm going to do it again. Didn't give us quite, we're not traveling very quickly across the moon. So you always want to be kind of retrograde when you're coming in for a landing. I'm going to burn heavy to get rid of most of our velocity now at this point. Now I'm going to use the shift key to fire. What I'm going to try to do at this point is give us just enough thrust that we're not accelerating or decelerating, which is kind of hard to do. As long as we're in the area of closeness. decelerating very slowly. You want to generally be underneath 5 meters a second when you touch down, because otherwise if you're like at 8 or 10, you start breaking landing gear and tipping over. So we want to bring it in nice and easy, and retrograde is going to do all our maneuvering for us and control our descent so that we don't have to like be pressing keys and panicking and stuff like that. I'm going to add a touch more power. Actually, no, I think we're good. Yeah, I'm going to add a touch more and then take it off again. And then kill the engine the moment you touch down. So boom, we're down. Now you can use the bracket keys to switch to ships that are in proximity to you. If you're beyond a couple kilometers away, it won't let you switch. So I'm going to turn on my jetpack, it's on. I'm going to jump and hit the shift key so I can get some altitude. Shift is up when you're under the jetpack. And then you use your AWSD keys to steer. I'm going to give it a little bit more forward thrust. This is a lot faster than walking. And it's hard to maintain your altitude with the shift key because if you press it too long, you just go up. If you don't press it enough, you go down. So you got to constantly be tapping it. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So what I want to do here is get to the capsule so we can grab on, which will be the F key. But we grab on and we board. Now we're good to go. We have a craft that's not tipped over. And we're going to rendezvous with our return vessel, set as target. So we're nice and stable. I'm going to go ahead and speed up time so that it comes around. I'm going to wait till it's right above me to launch. It'll be easier to maneuver and rendezvous. Okay, now I'm going to throttle up and I'm going to press the D key and I don't know, go about at 45 degrees. There's a million different ways you can do this. There's no one correct way. I mean, there's a very efficient way to do it, but no right and wrong way, really. And you want to get your apoapsis right up on target there, so I'm going to give it a touch more. I'm going to goose the throttle a little bit. Try and get it to about the same height as the ship is at. Now, this ship is traveling at 528 meters a second, and we're traveling at 300, so it's going faster than us. So it's going to be out here by the time we get up to its altitude, which means we're going to have to catch up to it. So if you practice, you can actually get this down so that you, right when you get to your apoapsis, you'll be right next to it, and all you have to do is thrust in the same direction it's moving. And so I'm going to go to orbit, and I'm going to forward thrust. I'm going to burn in the prograde direction. So I'm going to give it very little with the shift key, and when these two line up, when we come all the way around, back around, that's how close we're going to be. Oh, ran out of fuel. So I'm going to jettison. I should have jettisoned that earlier so that it would have crashed on the moon. Now we have space junk. So I'm going to give it a little bit more. Oops. Actually, now I'm going to turn on there. I gave it too much on accident. The engine was on. So now I'm doing reverse RCS thrust. Like that. So we're going to have a separation of 0.4 kilometer or half a kilometer basically when we come all the way around our orbit. So you can see that it's ahead of us, but we're going to take the inside line. Think of it like running around a track. If you have the inside line, you cover less distance. So you're going to actually catch up. So you see how far apart we are. Now we're going to fast forward, and you'll see that as we come around to this point, we're going to be very close to each other. And we're going to left click until we see target, and we're going to face retrograde to target. Now what this means is we have 55 meters per second of speed different from him, so we need to take that down to 0. I'm going to wait till it gets a little bit higher up here. And then we're going to cancel out our speed relative to each other. We're still in orbit. Now I'm going to face my target with this button. That's what these buttons are for. I'm going to give it a little bit of thrust. About a meter per second. Now, I'm going to orient my ship so I'm straight up and down. And I'm going to turn on my RCS. Now we use the J, K, I, L keys to go up, down, left, and right. And use the H to thrust forward and the N to reverse. So I'm going to hit the J key here to bring our prograde ball so we're lined up right on target like a bullseye there. And then I'm going to press H to thrust with our cold gas thrusters. Hit J a little bit, it's looking a little bit offset. Get a little bit more. We can see our monopropellant. We have plenty of it. I'm going to speed up time a little bit. There's our space junk. See how it's dangerous to leave it floating around? It could hit you on accident when you're not paying attention. So now I'm going to hit the J key to line this back up. And I'm going to hit the N key to slow down our approach. Now we're thrusting retrograde to our direction so that we're not coming in so fast. So now I'm going to use the bracket key and switch. Where are we? There we are. I'm going to set as target, and then I'm going to point at target. Then I'm going to hit the bracket key again. And from here I'm just going to maybe thrust forward a little bit so we don't have to wait forever. I think in real life NASA does this really slow. I think it takes them like an hour or two to dock to the space station. I think they have a lot of procedures and checklists that they have to check off in the process. And something even small can be catastrophic and cause a whole wave of problems that you have to spend money to correct. So they're very cautious about how they do this. Basically, when you keep your prograde marker right on the target. Oops, I forgot to re-click this. Now this is going to make sure that your ship is facing the target, but you also need to thrust so that you're moving directly at the target. And you can see that we're going to come in for a nice soft dock. Now I'm going to start pressing N to slow down. There we go. and now we're docked. Now we've partially rescued him. We still have to get him back to Kerbin. So I'm going to transfer him to this capsule, so they're both in this capsule. And I'm going to right click on the fuel tank and then hit control and right click. Nope. Oops. Oh, I haven't done this in a while. I'm going to right click and then hit alt and right click. And then I'm going to transfer the fuel into here. I'm actually going to give a little bit back. Actually, no, we need RCS will deorbit that. So now we have extra fuel for the return home. We actually don't need it, but that's how you transfer fuel. So I'm going to undock. And right now, when we undocked, we're in control of this one. So we hit the bracket key. And now we're in control of that one. Going to turn on the SAS and face retrograde. And then I'm going to hit the RCS and use these thrusters to thrust us opposite. And it'll take a while because we don't have a lot of acceleration power under RCS, but basically the gist is that you want to lower your periapsis so that it hits the moon, so therefore your spaceship will collide with the moon and won't stay in space and create space junk for further accidents. It's called the Kepler syndrome. A lot of people are really worried about it. I'm not super worried about it. Because, I mean, if you throw a tennis ball in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and call that tennis ball, as an example, orbital debris, what are the chances that somebody's boat is actually going to get hit by that tennis ball as it's motoring across the Pacific Ocean? I mean, space has got a lot of room. And not only that, it's not just one plane like the surface of the ocean. There's a lot of altitude to it. It's three-dimensional, so there's just really a lot of room. And I don't think it's going to matter until there's millions of pieces of debris up there. And we've got a collision course. So I'm going to come on the map screen. And now we are back. So this is the ship we were just in. We're moving away from it. Now we got to plot a course back to Earth. So let's go to our map screen. You can see the communications satellite that I installed. It's in a near rectilinear halo orbit. So what we're going to do to go back to, so the moon is traveling this way. So to get back to Earth, we need to travel this way. So right about here, somewhere in this area, we're going to plant a maneuver node. Oops, a little bit too much. Now we can also grab the maneuver node itself and move it around. There we go. So what we're going to do is hit our maneuver node. We're going to fast forward time. We're going to do, like always, 15-second burn, so we're going to split that in half. And as we get down to 7 or 8 seconds for the maneuver node, we're going to turn it on, but we don't have to give it full throttle, so I'm going to use the shift key and go about a third, maybe a half. So you can see which direction we're thrusting. See how we're not pointed at Earth, but we're going to end up going to Earth. So space can be counterintuitive sometimes. We're traveling in this direction, so when this parabola gets higher, this orbit gets high enough, the moon's gravity will not have control of us anymore, and this will break, and you'll see it happen. I'm going to slow it down a little bit, see? So now, this means we're going to escape the moon's gravity, And this is our changing path as we're still under power, and the target path is right here in purple. So I'm going to kill the motor and see where we're at. We're at 37 kilometers. I'm going to give it a tiny bit using the shift key and bring it down to about 25. There we go. That's close enough. So now we're going to fast forward a little bit. I'm going to watch what happens here. We're going to fly out away from the moon. But what we've done is we've slowed down around the Earth, so that in essence lowers your periapsis close to the Earth. And in this case, it's going to dip us into the atmosphere, which is going to be enough to cancel out all this extra energy that we have in our ellipse and bring us into a suborbital trajectory where we can deploy our parachute and land. You can see the moon is way down here now. Look at that, we barely used any fuel. So now I'm going to hit retrograde. We're already in the atmosphere, so I'm going to jettison the fuel tank, activate the parachutes. I'm going to change this one to open at the highest altitude it can. So you can see as we start to decelerate from the friction of the atmosphere, as we get deeper into the atmosphere, our g-forces come up. I know you know that. So now I'm going to switch to the map screen. We can still see our g-screen here, but you can see what slowing down at our periapsis is going to lower our apoapsis. You can see we're getting thicker and thicker into the atmosphere. We're almost at 2 Gs. Coming up on 3 Gs. And now we're suborbital. I hope we don't land on a mountain. So we're going to land right in a small town, right next to a small town near a mountain. Exactly what we don't want to do. We'll switch to above ground level from above sea level, so we can see our actual altitude above the ground. And now our parachute's open really high, so we have to wait forever to touch down. But you see we're going slow enough that it's not going to break the spaceship or hurt our precious astronauts. That's it. That's our moon mission. So if you practice that a little bit, you don't have to practice the second mission, but the first mission, really getting to orbit is the important part. And then learning how to go to the moon and Mars and learning how to dock takes a little bit more work. But over time you'll get it and you'll get good at it, and then we can have awesome space races. You'll be Oliver, commander of the Southern Legions. And that about wraps it up. I'll see you soon, buddy.